So I guess to start off, how would you define gentrification?
I would define gentrification as something where you're forcing the existing population out of a community.
I would find gentrification is removing a cultural community from existence. Removing a community that had a rich culture in an area that maybe you have other plans for.
Definitely lost of history. If you look at Brooklyn between Riverside Avenue and Park Street, virtually everything in that community has been torn down in the last 15 years. So what you have now is development that's really not much different than what you see sitting in the parking lot of St. John's Town Center or off Gate Parkway. There's nothing really unique about it. It's apartments, but it's not the historic Brooklyn. It's not what was discussed in the early 2000s in terms of redevelopment to improve the community for the residents that were there.
My name is Tim Gilmore, and I'm a writer. I've written a number of books about Jacksonville. So we are in front of the old Mount Calvary Baptist Church, which in a number of ways is really emblematic of what's going on with Brooklyn right now. So this is obviously, one of the oldest structures still left in the Brooklyn area. And it was occupied until not too long ago, really. The reverend who took over the church moved it to another location, kind of just left the church sitting here, and it's a wonderful structure, but the question is, what should be done with it? So there is a group who wants to turn it into a distillery, and that seems in some ways like a wonderful idea, and it would certainly save the building, but does it directly benefit people who have been living in Brooklyn for decades and decades?
Culture does something for you in your community, in your soul, in your mind, in your thinking that money cannot. Not saying that money isn't important. It has a place. You need money to pay bills and feed yourself. But I still think that that area could have been developed in a point where the culture was still present. The way it looks now, it looks like it's a whole new place. It looks like culture was not there. There are ways that you can make money using culture. In fact, there are studies that show that places that embrace the arts, that it brings in money, and more so than just knocking it down and putting in new things. So there was a way, there is a way, there could have been a balance into that.
The city is an entity that facilitated the development that's there today, that rezoned land, that paved the way for the loss of history, when on a different angle, the city could also be an entity that found a way to mix that new development in with the existing residents to create a more unique and vibrant community.
And how long have you been here in this house?
Just 49 years.
Yeah. How old are you?
54.
In the new building. It happened pretty quickly. Did anyone ever try to talk with the people who've been living here for a long time?
No. We just seen one day that everybody from who was close a block within Forest Street and College Street, they moved back. You know what I'm saying? Everybody moved back 2 blocks.
Yeah.
Toward Edison. They just moved back the other way. Nobody informed us about anything.
Mm-hmm. So you lived in Jacksonville for a while, right?
Yes.
So you've been here through the process.
Yes, right.
What did that feel like watching? Was it clear at the beginning of what was happening?
To me, no. And I would like to think that I am well involved in what's going on because of what I do as a historian. One day there were the houses there, and I remember coming back a couple of days later or so, and they were gone. And then the sign coming up, oh, this is what's coming. And I'm like, well, what is coming? But I know one day it had this character, the next day it was leveled.
I would say the city of Jacksonville has made some mistakes in terms of respect to the community that was there. I know when I first came to town, the community was significantly larger. There were studies going on about how to improve the quality of life for its residents. And the residents were there involved in those studies, but the focus was not on replacement. And what's occurred over the last 10 years is demolition of existing building stock and the infill development that's marketed to a crowd altogether that has no relationship with the historical development pattern and history of that community. So I think that's been a major negative on the city of Jacksonville's part. Go back to the year 2000. Riverside Avenue was a narrow street with buildings and businesses lined to the street, sort of like you would see with 5 Points today, or say an Ybor City if you were visiting Tampa, where you could actually walk to different businesses and shops down the street. As a part of the redevelopment, the city and the Department of Transportation tore down a full 1.5 blocks of buildings to widen that street to 6 lanes.
When the change started all the way right with DOT before they expanded I-10. Went to meetings, they closed all the streets up, Addison and Codesite them. But in 95, when the Jaguars came, there were houses directly against 95, which is Dalewood Avenue, where my mother was born. And they said that they didn't want the people to see the blight as they came in to see the game. So then they decided they'll expand the expressway this way rather than they could expand it on the other side where there was nothing in it. And so there was houses, houses were perfectly good, nothing wrong with them, that Eminent Domain came in and they had to move. Even there was a church right there at the corner of Dalewood and Elder Street.
Your mom was born in Brooklyn?
Yeah, born in Brooklyn.
Do you know what year?
1933 on Short Price. Price Street used to go across Myrtle, and then there was a small street that you still can kind of see where it used to be at, where they're building everything up right now. It was right there.
The road, like Oak Street or Stonewall Street that way, the roads are more than a century old, and they still run into the apartment complex, but the apartment is gated. So they had to close off public access to roads that people in this community had used for more than a century, and now essentially those roads belong to the people who live in the apartment. Exclusivity means you exclude somebody, right? So the message is pretty clear, you know?
Would you say the city of Jacksonville aided in Brooklyn's demise?
Oh, absolutely. And one, not just aiding its demise, but not being supportive of any efforts to preserve what was there. Instead of reviving it, you just tear it down and put in new things. And it's lost the luster, the character, and that's my view of it, that the city did not help revive that neighborhood in the way I think they could have. Even if you had to get rid of some things, I think there's some of the history could have still remained in that area. If you're not mindful and paying attention to what's going on, it could happen to your community. In one sense, it happened to Springfield, but there were efforts made to save that neighborhood.
Somewhere in the late 60s, that the whole area was declared eminent domain. So all those houses in that block had to move, and they put the community center there. So you've seen it happen one time. Who's to say it can't happen again?
I don't think we've learned our lesson from Brooklyn. I would probably tell you the majority of leaders in this town would tell you that Brooklyn's a happening place and it's the type of development we want to see. We haven't learned about the loss of culture because we don't understand what that culture is on a larger sense. But I have talked to several people along the Myrtle Avenue corridor, which leads into Newtown and Durkeeville. There is a fear among residents there as redevelopment takes place along the corridor, what it means for their community. Will they be able to be a part of this redevelopment process? Or being in Jacksonville and seeing what happened to LaVille and seeing what happened to Brooklyn, are they going to be forced out at some point?
During the rebuilding, it was lives. That's what it was, lives. People who would be here when I had 14 players who continued bringing their children and playing, but because the ministry of houses and everything in churches which were displaced, not for no good reason, but for a reason where that's what they think we need here in Jacksonville.